Fitton from Judicial Watch. They do so much great work in trying to get to the bottom of the deep state. And if any of these provisions ever went through and were made into federal law, we would never get to the bottom of the deep state. The deep state would be on top of us for the rest of our lives and our children's and our grandchildren's. Tom Fitton, thanks for being with us here on the Howie Carr Show.
Hey, Howie, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about some of the stuff that Nancy Pelosi and the squad tried to pack into this bill that they've been proposing.
Well, they've been pushing this issue for some time, and I warned just a few weeks ago that the left was going to use the coronavirus crisis as an excuse to set up a system that will allow them to be more easily able to steal elections. That includes unlimited ballot harvesting, which essentially allows third parties to go around and gather ballots with virtually no regulation and deposit them at voting locations. Can you just imagine the voter fraud carnage as a result of that unregulated system?
We've already seen it
nationally.
We already saw it in 2018 in Southern California, didn't we? The Republicans lost how many congressional seats? A number of seats that the Republicans had won on election night were lost in the days, sometimes many days later, as the Democrats just continued coming up with more and more ballots from nursing homes and elsewhere, right?
Well, it's particularly susceptible to voter fraud. It actually increases the likelihood of voter fraud. And frankly, the Republican response is, well, we got to learn how to ballot harvest. And my response is we got to end ballot harvesting. People should show up and vote at the polls unless there's an extraordinary reason not to do so. And the idea that you could have anyone, Republican or Democrat, collecting ballots on your behalf is it's going to suppress the votes of people that they don't want to collect or whose ballots they throw out. And who knows about the provenance of the ballots they actually end up turning in. So you could end up voting 3 or 4 times under a ballot harvesting scheme. And on top of that, there would eliminate, this is Pelosi's goal also, which is to end voter ID. And at least for 2020, the way I read her proposed legislation, there would be no voter ID because you would be able to get your ballots in by mail nationally, and there'd be no way, practically speaking, to check the validity of your identity.
Yeah, I've never understood this whole thing about, that somehow it suppresses the turnout to have to produce an ID. I mean, let's be honest, Tom, who doesn't have a driver's license, right? Is it a problem that, you're suppressing commercial airliner traffic by forcing people to produce a driver's license? Is it suppressing the enjoyment of professional athletic games by forcing people to produce a driver's license to get an alcoholic beverage at a game? I don't think that's a big concern, is it? And I think voting is a lot more important than going on a commercial airliner or getting a beer at a baseball game.
Well, of course it isn't a big concern. That's why most Americans support voter ID, and that's why it's the law in 35 states. And this bill that Pelosi had been pushing, and I don't know what the status of it is now. We won't know till, again, this $2 trillion bill is passed, what's in it, would override voter ID requirements effectively in 35 states.
Yeah. And this is their goal, too. And it's the same thing with they've got all these plans, Tom. You know this, ranked choice voting. I mean, what a bad idea that is. They're trying to repeal it in Maine now. We lost a Republican congressman up there. He won the election on election day by 2,500 votes. And after the ranked choice voting went in, he was defeated. And it's such an odious concept that Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown have vetoed versions of it in California. How bad does it have to be for those two guys to veto bills like that? They threw it out in Burlington, Vermont, Bernie Sanders' hometown.
Yeah, I mean, ranked choice voting is a lefty hobby horse. It's been around for years, and it's designed to get leftists not put into office who otherwise would be unable to win a majority. So this is the look. Let me take a step back. Our republic is under assault. tried to remove the president illicitly. They abused Congress to do it. They abused the authority of Congress to do it. They tried to hijack the Senate. Our borders are under assault, and the ability to govern ourselves through clean elections is under assault. And we've highlighted just a few: the attack on voter ID, the idea that you'll have third parties roving around collecting ballots from and maybe intimidating innocent Americans into voting one way or another. That's the goal here. You talk about ranked voter selection, ranked candidate selection here. You have the assault on the Electoral College. They want to game the system.
16-year-old voting. There's more 16-year-old voting, Tom, and letting illegal aliens vote in municipal elections, which would be an initial step, getting their foot in the door to vote in all elections. Illegal aliens voting in elections.
What does this have to do with the coronavirus? What does it have to do with the coronavirus? Why was Nancy Pelosi trying to put it in there? Because this is a central tenet of the left. There are hundreds of groups, Howie, focused on this issue of elections, and on the right, there's just a few of us.
Yeah, I know, and you're right. I remember going to a Republican gathering in Boston of some of the high rollers. I got invited for some reason, and I asked them about voter harvesting, because I think that's even more of a sinister scheme than ranked choice voting. And you're right, that was their answer. We've got to learn how to do it. No, I don't think you're right. No one should be harvesting votes. I mean, harvesting votes. Think about that. Didn't the Republicans try it in North Carolina, and an election got thrown out? I mean, they ended up winning the new election, but I mean, that's a problem. And you know, when it goes to court, the Republicans are going to get caught because the courts punish Republicans when they don't punish Democrats. That's the whole lesson of the deep state, isn't it?
But ballot harvesting is illegal in most states. It's not legal. I mean, certainly there's exceptions where, you know, you can designate your spouse if you're sick to deliver a ballot for you. I mean, no one's objecting necessarily to that. We're talking about strangers going around knocking on doors, collecting ballots. In North Carolina, it was illegal. But if you did it in California, it was legal. What does that tell you?
Yeah. Why don't you explain to people, because people who don't live in California or North Carolina may not understand what we're talking about here by ballot harvesting. Give us a definition, Tom Fitton.
You get a ballot, you fill it out at home. Someone knocks on your door and says, "Are you voting?" And they take your ballot and they supposedly deliver it on your behalf. We don't know who's doing the collecting. There's little in terms of regulation and who's certifying how it's done. It's necessarily intimidating. And you can imagine the opportunities for fraud and abuse as a result of this unchecked intermediary activity between you and the ballot box. The voters got to vote. The idea that a third party does the voting for you, practically speaking, by delivering ballots, it's a recipe for disaster.
There's a term in law, Tom, you know this, chain of custody. You know, so
exactly right.
you have to always know who has a piece of evidence so that it hasn't been tampered with. Where is the chain of custody in ballot harvesting? As far as I can tell, there is none.
No, and if it is, it's just fake. So it's just fake. You see this with in the bill, they say you're not allowed to get paid per ballot, but, you know, that doesn't mean anything. You would have people paid, and, you know, you could have an illegal in California. You can have a foreign national do the collecting. You can have a bunch of people from the local embassy from whatever country you want go around do the collecting. There's no limit on that type of activity. It's a dangerous situation in California in terms of election integrity, and now the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and the left, and this is a leftist issue, is trying to push it and make it national law.
Right. And I mean, this is you're right. It's going on around the country. This isn't just a California or a Maine or a North Carolina problem. Down here in Florida, in 2018, the elections for the Senate and the governor were very close, and they were just continuing to count ballots over until the count turned out right in Broward County and in Miami-Dade County in South Florida. And they finally stopped the recounting. And if they hadn't, probably this guy, Andrew Gillum, who was just caught in a hotel room in Miami Beach, naked, drunk with a gay hooker and bags of crystal meth, he might have been the governor of Florida. Can you imagine that? If they'd allowed the vote counting to continue down here, Rick Scott might not be the senator from Florida.
Or George W. Bush may not have been president. I mean, that was it's more
going way back. Yeah.
That. Look, there are many close elections in our country, as you point out in Florida. It's not only in Florida. Many state and local elections decide by one or two votes or a handful of votes. And of course, if it's your vote that's stolen, it's a very important civil rights issue. Voter fraud is a civil rights issue that's really at issue here. And the idea that anyone's votes are being suppressed is just made up. It's made up. They're playing the race card. The fact is, the evidence is that when you increase election security, you increase minority turnout, because especially in urban areas, minorities recognize if the political system is corrupt, why participate? And when you ensure that their vote will count, minorities will turn out in greater numbers, which makes sense. The left patronizes minorities, pretends they don't know how to vote correct, pretends they don't have IDs, when in fact they want their votes to count and will participate in greater numbers when you assure them their votes will count and they won't be stolen by the big bosses that run urban areas, not only of the left, but as in North Carolina, it happens on the right too.
Are you, Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch, are you more concerned about Russians or Democrats stealing elections in the United States?
We always have to worry about the internal enemies of the rule of law than the outside enemies. We have a national defense, but we'll all need to be adamant to protect our Constitution here at home as well.
So where can people go to read more about the great work that your organization does, Tom Fitton?
It's at judicialwatch.org. And of course, we're on Facebook and Twitter and such. And, this coronavirus is going to pass, but this threat to our elections isn't.
Yeah. And we got to hope this isn't slowing down John Durham's investigation into the deep state as well.
Can it be slowed down anymore?
Don't depress me, Tom Fitton.
Just ask it.
I'm trying to keep that glass half full today, not half empty. All right,
well,
Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch. Check out judicialwatch.org. They do so much more investigative work than all of the alt-left media combined, and on a much smaller budget. I'll tell you, they know what they're doing, and they want to get to the bottom of it. Unlike New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC. Thank you very much for being with us, Tom Fitton. I'm Howie Carr.